Okay, I'm going to call our Village Plan Commission meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Chris Zellner.
Here.
Gary Hertzberg.
Here.
Bill Willis.
Here.
Brian Malish. Chris Thomas.
Here.
Brian Wallace.
Here.
Kevin Phelps.
Here.
Okay, first item we have is minutes. Look for motion.
Move approval of the minutes of the March 14th meeting.
Motion by Phil.
Second.
Second by Chris Thomas. Any comments? Call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Public comments. Is there anyone here who'd like to make any comments? Anything on or off the agenda this evening? Looks like we have two things for public hearing. We'll get to those. Any other comments? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. Under new business, we have public hearing and discussion action on an amendment to section 133.995 of the zoning code to change the parking requirements for certain residential and non-residential uses. Tim?
Thank you, Chair Zellner. What I'd like to do, and if it's okay with you, is walk through these changes. There are 16 sections in section 133.995. However, there aren't changes to each one, so I'll be brief, but I think that would be beneficial to both people who are here as well as the commissioners. So I'll be as brief as I can, and let me know, Tracy, when you're ready, because we'll have
Yeah, I'm sorry,
have the relevant section up on screen.
open. There we go. Must have spelled out on
There we go. Okay, so again, I mentioned there are 16 sections within this section of the zoning code that relate to parking. Section 1, under access, no proposed changes. Section 2, there's a proposal to allow up to 10% of the required number of stalls to be smaller than, I'll say, normal, if you will, 9 by 18, which would allow for compact cars or electric vehicles, and the dimensions of those would be 8 by 16 as compared to 9 by 18. And again, that's an up to 10%. It's not necessarily a requirement. It could be. Section 3. This differentiates non-residential districts from residential, clarifying the difference between residential and non-residential regarding parking in the front yard. And there's one slight change under C, 3C, and that is near the end where it says Division 2 of Article, and I believe that should be Article 7, not Article 6, just a Scrivener's error there. Sections 4, 5, and 6, no proposed changes. Section 7 is a new proposal for requiring curbing around the edges of all parking and drive areas in non-residential districts and for any residential development with 5 or more units. Moving on to number 8. So this is probably where may get a little bit more discussion, and if you want to take questions, I guess, during that time or after, either way. Section 8, a portion of section 10 is moved here to help define the area or the manner in which the metric is proposed, which is says where floor space is indicated in the table below as a basis for determining amount of off-street parking requirement, it shall mean the gross floor area inside the exterior walls unless specified. So the big one, I think, that was one of the catalysts for this whole review of our parking standards is the first one related to multifamily. As you'll see, there are no proposed changes for single-family or two-family homes. The standards there will stay the same. So what we're proposing is that the multifamily standards change from simply 2 stalls for each dwelling unit, which is the current standard, to a standard based on the unit type. And the plan commissioners, I'm sure you remember this, the last several multifamily projects, developers have asked for relief from that standard and have been granted. And essentially, the standard that's proposed here is that standard that has been followed, which is for studio units, 1 stall per dwelling unit, for 1-bedroom units, 1.5 stalls per dwelling unit, and for 2-bedroom or greater, 2 stalls per dwelling unit. There's another proposed change in here that comes from a neighboring community's ordinance, and this one is for buildings with 5 or more units, one parking stall per unit must be enclosed or below living quarters or covered. A Upon review of that, I think in staff's judgment, that may actually be detrimental to housing costs to require covered parking. So as far as a recommendation, staff is actually recommending that not be included or removed. However, obviously that's your decision. Before you is a comment provided from Commissioner Malish, and he actually, as you can see there, wanted to see this covered parking requirement included in the standard. So we'll get to there probably during discussion, but just wanted to point that out. He was in favor of including that standard. Then next, changing over to elderly housing, senior housing, and I think that's regarded as 55 plus. Yep, okay. The standard there is decreased slightly from 1.2 stall for each dwelling unit to 1 stall per dwelling unit, plus 1 stall for each employee on largest work shift. And then as projects come in, those could be reviewed on a case-by-case basis as far as the resident makeup. So obviously, if there's a very senior population who don't drive, having a significant parking requirement there may not be in the interest of either the village or that operator. Next, there is a slight reduction for hotels, motels, B&Bs from 1.2 stalls for guest room to 1 stall per bedroom plus 1 stall for employee on the largest work shift. Let's see, next, some minor changes so the designation of sororities, dorms, rooming houses, et cetera, felt that really is an unlikely use in the village, and so we're proposing to strike that. Subsection 10 could address anything not listed in this table, and we'll get to that shortly. Nursing homes or other long-term housing for non-driving residents, instead of 1 stall per resident, this is 1 stall per 6 patient beds plus 1 stall per employee on the largest work shift. So you may notice a common theme, and that's more on the demand of people that will be in a given facility based on a use. Stall, or like generally employees versus a area standard. Switching then to hospitals, recommend changing that standard from 1 stall per bed to 2 stalls per 3 patient beds, plus 1 stall per staff, doctor, and each other employee on the largest work shift. No changes proposed for medical and dental clinics. Then switching to, as we go farther down the table, retail, business, and commercial. Current standard is 1 stall per 200 square feet, proposing a change to 1 stall per 300 square feet. I would say conditions, factors have changed significantly in the last several years. Most notably, the pandemic, I would say, exacerbated them, but online retail, online shopping is becoming more prevalent, and having a large parking requirement for retail businesses does not seem in keeping with current practices. So that 1 stall per 300 is consistent with other area communities as well. Let's see. Manufacturing and process plants, instead of an area standard, 1 stall per 1,000 square feet, that's based on actual people who are going to be at that facility, employees, 1 parking stall for each full-time equivalent employee on the work shift, plus 1 stall for each vehicle owned by the business. Obviously, with machine automation and so forth, there may be less workforce demand there. So this parking standard reflects more of a who will be there, not how large a facility that will be. Let's see, then theaters, auditoriums, community centers, just clarifying, right now our standard says 1 stall for each 5 seats or 20%, and this is just clarifying, adding 1 stall for each patron equal to 20% of the building capacity, whichever is greater. The next standard breaks down the parking standard for schools, educational institutions. There's the standard for elementary and junior high schools, 1 space per teacher and staff member plus 1 space per 2 classrooms, and then a different standard, which is similar to the current one, for high school, vocational school, and colleges, based primarily on the recognition that there are students who are of driving age. So that differentiation is again, elementary and junior high kind of in one category, high school, voc tech, and college facilities, another standard. Libraries and museums, art galleries, the change there from 1 stall per 300 feet of floor area to one stall per 500. So again, relaxing that standard a bit. And as a comparison, I think Middleton is 800, so they've gone even farther for these types of uses. Funeral homes, instead of an area standard, one stall for 300 square feet, that standard becomes based on the number of people there, one space per three patron seats at max capacity. Let's see then, moving to churches, other places of indoor religious assembly, moving again from an area standard to occupancy, one stall per 5 seats at max capacity. And then the rest of the uses, as stated on the table, remain the same. Section 9 is new. This is a new proposal. So under all the table that we just talked about, there was the minimum parking required. What is being proposed here is actually a maximum number of spaces, and that number would be essentially whatever that minimum is plus 10%, up to 10%. And then stated in there, except Planning Commission may allow special exceptions consistent with subsection 16 below, and we'll get there in just a minute. Then the next, I would say, significant change is section 11. This is for combined uses. The current standard really doesn't take into consideration the sharing of uses. It essentially says you have two separate uses, you have to have the minimum standard for both. This provides a minimum of 80% of the sum of the number of stalls required for each individual use, and then provision about hours of operation. Let's see, next, moving on to section 14. There's some clarifying language there about residential uses. Let's see. Oh, then under 14B, I think there's a section there we're recommending being stricken because that distance, 400 feet, conflicts with the previous section, which talks about a distance of 500 feet. And then C and D really insert the words off-lot versus accessory to help further clarify where that off-site parking would be located. And then the last changes into section 15, which references 16 below. And this is a thing I think to think about, section 16, when we're looking at all these changes. And this is in the current code. And that is that the Plan Commission may authorize exception to the parking standards where the applicant can demonstrate proposed use would generate less or more. Plan Commission could require additional parking stalls where it's determined the proposed use is likely to generate more, et cetera. So there is this relief valve, if you will, from strict adherence to these proposed standards. However, I think the intent is really to a few items to address affordable housing, that's one of them, but also to address just current practices and reflection of the times we're in. So with that, those are the changes proposed for that section and available for questions.
Jason, before I open up to public hearing, do you have any comments?
Nothing to add. That was a pretty solid overview. I'll jump in later as needed.
Okay, so then I'm gonna open up our public hearing. We have two people that registered to speak. First, we have Mary Ellen Kearney, 317 West Main Street.
This is all so confusing, I can't understand it. So I thought I would ask a couple questions, if that's okay. I have some concerns if there's differences between, let's say you wanted to have some sort of multifamily unit downtown, where they've already got all that stuff, like on Baker Street where the Opera House is. Would there be different density requirements there where you're impinging on neighboring neighborhoods for needed additional parking? Or if you were building like someplace out where this is just all being planned for new construction? Because one of my concerns is that a one-bedroom unit, if you had a couple and they each had jobs in different parts of Madison, they would have 2 cars. And if you had all one-bedroom units, you just wouldn't have enough places to put parking. Where would it go? And is that a consideration? If you're already joining an area that's dense and going to become even more dense with fewer remaining parking spots, it's different than if you're planning a new area. It's much easier to plan space then. Because even now, it can get pretty darn crowded downtown. And we don't have any public transportation, so that's not really an option. If people have to get someplace, they have to go with their cars. Or if you had a couple young kids just out of school that were sharing a one-bedroom apartment, I don't think that 1.5 parking spaces is okay. You could have a car and an electric bike, and that's about it. So that's just my question and concern.
Thank
So,
you.
is that a just question?
Sure. I think we'll be discussing all those things here, so thank you. And then Linda Ashmore, 114 South Street.
Thanks for the chance to weigh in on the proposed changes, and I think most of them make sense because they're based on usage trends. But I did have 3 areas of concern, and the first one is the multifamily. We're gonna go from 2 stalls per unit down to 1 stall per studio, or 1.5 for a 1 bedroom. And kind of echoing what Mary Ellen said, I just don't think that's realistic. When I had my kids in high school age, you had 3 or 4 cars because you had 3 or 4 people working. And so when you say you're gonna just have, 1 car for a unit, it just doesn't make sense. We don't have public transportation here. And we are really a bedroom community, and one of the things that was brought up, that the exceptions were given to, I think, Hubby and Lamp House, or maybe Kilkenny, I don't know which ones. But I walked down behind Lamp House today at the parking lot, and I counted about 11 stalls open. They want to put a restaurant in there. I mean, that's been the plan forever, and the pandemic made that not happen. But I'm wondering how you're going to fit a restaurant in, because that's during 3 o'clock, middle of the day, that there's not a whole lot of parking. Then you want to add a mixed use and say, we're going to put a restaurant here, but where are they going to park at? So when you look at the mixed use saying it's even going to go down to 80%, I just don't think that's really feasible. And then the retail and commercial, I really have a hard time visualizing things when you say you're going to go from a gross square footage from a service area. So I was wondering, before you go to, go forward with this, if you could have some comparisons, like behind Lone Girl and Red Barn Company store, that's usually pretty parked up. And so if you end up making it be less parking for something like that, I don't think that's really a good plan. So there could be some comparisons, like what would it be, what would be required for something that has the square footage of that development versus the new, and see if that would actually give you enough parking. And basically, when you reduce the number of spaces needed, and like Mary Ellen was talking about, I live close to Highway 19, a block away. So parking is an issue. I mean, we've got Asian Garden on my block, and and we also have a 4-unit apartment building on the same block, so a lot of U-turns to be able to get parking at Asian Garden. So you want to be able to have, keep your businesses have parking by them too. So the covered thing, I can see taking that out maybe, or maybe making it be if you have 50 or more units, because if you start putting in big apartment buildings, I don't think you want to take all that land mass to say, let's, make a huge parking lot. So I think that's a change that can maybe be better. And the last one is just with the elementary and high school parking changes. As we go towards the school district looking at a referendum, I think that we should weigh in with the school district and say, how does this affect anything? They make sense on paper, that you differentiate between high school and middle school, but when you go to look at that there's more uses besides during the school day for the schools, that you have, basketball games and football games, and so would there be enough parking if you go to this new standard is my concern. So what I'm asking is, could the retail, commercial, multifamily, and school portions be pulled and have some more research done? And the rest of it, I think, is really good. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. So thanks.
Thank you. Those are the two I had. I'm assuming, Maria, anything?
Not yet.
Okay. Then I'm going to I'm assuming, Roberta, that you don't have any questions? Okay. Then I'm gonna assume that we don't have any. I'm gonna close our public hearing section. Open it up to plan commissioners for questions, and I'm gonna start, since there's more of you on this side than this side, I'll start with Gary.
I think some good points were made. I'm concerned that we've made exceptions to some of our businesses, but I don't think we've had enough time to really evaluate, you know, has it been adequate to meet their needs? You know, sometimes when you go up to Brown Apartment, there's an awful lot of vehicles parked on the street up there. And so I'm concerned that reducing that, or limiting the parking for multifamily is a concern. I think the school issue, I look at Arboretum as the greatest example. I mean, that's a traffic accident waiting to happen anytime there's an event. When parents show up at that school, they're parked on both sides of the street, all the way down. There's nowhere near the adequate parking at schools when there's an event. I think that, I mean, I like that thought about the enclosed parking. And, you know, maybe it's not a 50 unit, but maybe it's a 16 unit or bigger. Should have enclosed parking underneath. So I'm concerned that we've made some exceptions. I don't know if we've taken enough time to study to see if it's been, you know, the right thing. I mean, I get why we want to make some of these changes, but they're very difficult fixes. If you make these changes and they're not adequate for parking, it affects an awful lot of neighbors around them, because people are parking on the street and they take parking spots away from residential areas. You know, some of the new strip mall we put up here with Vino and some of those places moving in, we've allowed them to have fairly large patios. And I think the idea behind it is, well, you know, businesses will be different, you know, busy at different parts of the day, and that'll all work out fine. I don't think we've seen that impact up there yet, and will it? And so I'm concerned about making changes at this point. I'd rather look maybe a year into this and see where we're really at, and, you know, how some of the exceptions we've made have worked out for us.
Okay, Phil?
Okay, thank you, sir. First of all, kudos on adding the curbs, because people parking on the grass and et cetera just make the area look bad by wearing down the grass and everything. I know it's a little bit of a challenge for the people that plow snow, but once they learn it's there, they can lift their plow and push it over. For apartments, I think these recommendations would be a little tight. I think the studios, I would go up to 1.5, and the one bedrooms at least 2, because there's a lot of people that double up, thinking of my own grandkids and everything. So they're on limited income, and they'll do whatever they can to save expenses. So probably we should do something to make sure that there's at least enough room to where there's space for a visitor once in a while, and et cetera. So maybe just a little bit more, not going down to just 1.5, 2. Thank you.
Brian?
How long do we got?
3 minutes. However long you need.
Well, so I guess I'll just start at the top. So number one, on the requirement in the parking standards to allow for compact and electric vehicles, I don't know that that's that should be in our call. I mean, that's, from my perspective, a business or a school or whatever should be dictating, or at least providing those stalls to their customers or consumers or workers, employees, whatever. I don't know that we need to put that in a standard. As far as the curbs, hey, I'm a fan of putting curbs around parking lots, but one of the comments was made about the increase in cost of housing by not having, or by requiring additional covered parking. Well, requiring curbs around parking lots is gonna do the same thing. Not maybe to the same degree, but it's gonna do the same thing. But I'm a fan of it, but it does add cost to the parkings. The multifamily, I agree with the comments were made. I think we're a little tight on spaces. I could get behind some of the other things here, as far as looking at number of residents and staff. I could get behind some of that, although there was one in here about 6. 1 and 6, that seemed a little tight, I thought. thought it should maybe be more like 1 and 3 or 1 and 4, but I'm not that expert. As far as the schools, I agree with some of the comments made. I think that, I got 2 high schoolers and they both drive, so was that maybe 1 and 6 or 1 and 5 on the high school stuff? I think that's also a little tight and should get comment from the school on what's needed, so. Oh, and then the last one here about the no more than 10%, realistically, whatever standard we have, that's what a developer's gonna put in there. But I think 10% is awful small for, increase. I think you should have options to be larger than that, because maybe the plan commission will look at it and say, hey, you need to have more spaces because of the uses that are going on. Maybe there's 2 restaurants on either end of the development, who knows what it is, right? And the space requirement is gonna be significant, so we have to have a little more latitude than 10%. That's all my comments.
That wasn't bad.
Well, I sped through a few, so.
Chris?
Yeah, I've got a few questions first, I guess. Can you provide a little context on where some of these numbers are coming from? Is it looking at Middleton and Sun Prairie, I think I saw somewhere? Are there any other details you can provide on that?
Yeah, it was based on our review of what I would characterize as your primary peers in the county. So Middleton, Sun Prairie, Verona, Fitchburg, and DeForest was the set that we were kind of checking back against as we were drafting these.
Okay. And then you also mentioned for context, the reason, I guess, for a lot of this is to have more affordable housing, right? To make it cheaper to build multifamily housing around here. Can you provide a little background maybe on some recent things that we've approved and what the parking looks like in those areas? Were they meeting the minimum that we have in here before these changes? And if not, what did we approve? Was it something less than that, and how much less?
So the last, help me get some help here, 4? Maybe 4
Projects.
multifamily projects?
Yeah, and I'd say probably the last 4 years. I mean, and that might be a close match to the number of projects too, but I mean, it's been a while now since the village has approved multifamily with the standards that are on the books.
So what have we approved? How much less? Is it somewhere in between what's proposed here and what's on the books now, or is it more like what's proposed here?
I think in most cases, it's pretty close to this is the standard we've applied, and they have generally been close to this standard. I can tell you that the most recent one that came through, which is the new multifamily added to Woodland Crest, they are coming in kind of in the middle between the two. So more than this revised standard, less than your current standard.
Okay. Is it more than the 10% more that's mentioned in here as being a maximum?
I don't believe so, but we'd have to verify that.
Okay. And then I would also echo a lot of the same concerns that we've heard around the schools and, consulting with them. I think it'd be good to consult with other businesses as well, not just the schools, on these potential changes. And then, the other concern that was brought up about public transportation. I mean, if we're looking at what Middleton and Sun Prairie are doing, they have public transportation, we do not. So I think that's, something to consider here when, we're making our decisions.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Kevin?
So I love the idea of making exceptions rather than changing the rules. But what I think we should do is go back and look at the exceptions we've made the last 4 years and find out how they've worked. Talk to the tenants that live in these places and say, we gave you less parking than the standard. How has it worked out? Because the idea of shrinking spaces for retail scares me. I'm a retailer. There's no bigger killer to restaurants and retail than full parking lots, because people just assume it's busy and they just don't go. You want them busy, but not that busy. I worry about, there's a coffee shop in Middleton that the parking lot's half as big as it should be. They just can't get people in and out of there. The way the world's changing with restaurants, there's a lot of people driving there and sitting in the parking lot waiting for their food to come out. So there's still just as many cars as there's ever been, maybe more. So I worry about some of that stuff. Covered parking, I don't worry about. I think, what does the market bear? If the market wants it, people will build that. I'm not overly concerned with that. But I really worry about multifamily cohabitating. More and more people are jamming into places. Houses are getting more and more expensive. To take parking down in multifamily scares me. And that's why I'd love to go back and just see what really happened when we made these exceptions, and is it working or not. And it seems like talking to the tenants or the landlords or somebody, the owners, just to see how it's really working out.
All right. Well, I have a lot of different comments, and I'm going to take my time with them. As I went through this, first off, we had a great piece of information provided for us from CNU, for those who didn't have a chance to look at it. I'm curious, when they had their minimum parking standards in here, we didn't really match what their recommendations were in here very well, looking at the two different things. They're quite different. Couple are the same, but most of them are not. So I'm curious why if that was factored into this as well, or you just looked at those surrounding areas. Second, we talk about hospitals. We don't have a hospital here. I don't know of any that are planned currently. But if we are going to look at changing the hospital's component, did we reach out to Columbus or Sauk or one of those places that have a hospital right now? And what are their standards, and are they meeting those with those hospitals? So that's just one suggestion I had in there. And I went through and basically said okay to all the different things that I was agreeing with, so I won't talk about those. Here we go here. So I agree with the schools that we should talk to the schools, and a high school is very different than elementary, junior high schools. Obviously with students driving in the space they need, they're already short on that. They've been short on that since I was in high school 30-plus years ago. When there's sporting events and various things going on, there's always people in the road. There's just not enough space for parking. So we may have had a problem here for 30-plus years ago, with regards to schools and how much parking we need available for them. Especially as we've expanded our opportunities for things to happen, whether it be more fields, more performing arts centers, to you name it. We have so many different activities that go on within the schools now. Can we meet our needs with that? So I absolutely think we need to corroborate and make sure that, or collaborate, I should say, with our school district and make sure that whatever we're doing with this, we don't harm them, even worse than potentially where they feel they might be at this time from a parking standpoint. And if I were a neighbor in that area, I would probably want to be very into what we're talking about today, especially the high school. Not saying that the junior high school, and as they're planning potentially to make the middle school part of the high school and grow that even more, we're going to have even more issues as far as I see with parking over there. And then traffic coming out of it. Parking and traffic probably have a quite high correlation. Where the areas that get jammed up are, the more people you have in an area, the more difficult the parking is going to become. Outside of those, the multifamily, I'm in agreement with everybody here who's made comments really that probably need to bump those up a little bit from where we're at. And I'm not a big fan of comparing us to Middleton and Sun Prairie, frankly, because they're different communities than what Waunakee is. I mean, when we look at what we have for multifamily versus what they have, they're completely different entities in how much they have compared to what we have. When we look at the business side of the world, we are the bedroom community. I think somebody brought that up, with a lot of our people going into those places to work and or habitat into restaurants and such. I also concerned about the business community right now. Before COVID, Amazon was here, and Amazon had already eaten into that share. So there was already that. I think the retailers were already adjusting to that from it. COVID just kind of exacerbated the situation, helped Amazon quite a bit. But I think as things are happening right now, as far as my observations have been, people are going out and doing things because they were pent in for so long. So they're wanting to go out and experience those things again. You see not only in retail, but in parks and all outdoor amenities and things that people can get really active again. So I think that those are the main areas I think that we need to focus to. Our multifamily, as we add, we aren't making a major shift with our multifamily. I think our policy kind of kept us in a pretty similar spot to where we'll be with that. as new ones come in, and I assume this is not gonna be this would be a grandfather situation. We can't go back and change requirements on our existing businesses, so they're not gonna be impacted. But those that are coming in now, we should be able to, I feel like we need to gather more information and gain more knowledge from those who are here and already have been experiencing it. Those that have been here for 30 years versus those that have been here for 3 months. You're gonna get different opinions from them, but they're gonna all be valid for what's happening. So I'm not ready to make any decisions on this at this point. I think that, that's just me. You guys might be ready, and that's fine, but I'm not ready to say yes to any of this. I think there needs to be a little bit more information provided, and like I said, as I was reading through those recommendations in the studies that were done, they didn't all match with what we're doing here. So that's a concern of mine. In comparing Middleton and Sun Prairie, it might be a little different, is all I'm getting at. So, Gary?
Chris, I was just thinking of this. Friday, I went to pick up fish down at Murphy's. People were parked out on, 113. They were backing up onto 113. It's just terrible. But, clearly there was not enough room to park. Sometimes if you go into the Lone Girl, it's great that some of those businesses are all doing well on Main Street, and you can't find a spot to park in there. So then you end up getting pushed out to the residential neighborhoods, and that's, always puts pressure on the residents out there Chris's comment about people are coming out, they're getting more active, it seems like. I would agree that I'd like to kind of hold off on this for a while. To Kevin's point, maybe go back and talk to some of the business owners, the apartment people, to say, hey, we made some changes, how's it working out for you? Is it adequate? I just feel better about it.
All right, next question I had for Jason, actually. So I took it off this study where it talks about Waunakee specifically in relation. It says setback recommendations. So I'm assuming do we have the same setbacks for all subdivisions? Because I feel like Savannah Village was one that we tried, that we gave, houses are much closer to the road than other areas.
Yeah, I think so.
And so when they're recommending that we reduce our residential setbacks, and that's gonna save us a lot of space and help potentially reduce prices because your lot sizes are smaller and such, as well as your houses. We did try that and it, didn't work, because people put as big a house as they possibly could, just closer to the road, and change the dynamics up with them. Their parking recommendations here do kind of mirror, though, when they say we encourage Waunakee to continue to reduce its parking requirements and to maintain its practice of tying residential parking to unit size rather than requiring 2 stalls of off-street parking per unit. We recommend this practice to be codified. So that kind of does go hand in hand with what we're doing with what their recommendation is. Housing type recommendations, this one kind of, I guess I have to have somebody read it to me because it confused me more than anything with what they put in here. But, whether it's 4 or 6 units being acceptable, trying to put those into neighborhoods, fitting them in. I'm not sure I guess I'll need to have you guys as our planning experts help us with that. And then accessory dwelling units, does everybody know what that is? Does anybody know what that really is in our group? Okay.
Is that my shed in the backyard?
Kind of. It's more like the housing that could go in people's garages. So if somebody wanted to add, if they have a detached garage, they could make that into an apartment for somebody.
Mother-in-law suite or something.
And they're talking about maybe we could look at doing something like that, and they're encouraging us to look at that more. So this was more designed, I think, for our housing and helping with the affordable housing type units, or giving access, more access to the community. So I just feel like this was, I'm not ready because I feel like I'm all over the board right now with the different things that are on here. And as Mary Ellen, I think, eloquently stated, that she was confused because there's so many different things that we're looking at doing within this part of the code. And I think we need to have something that's here's what we're doing. And I feel like right now it's too discombobulated. Maybe break it down into different segments and take us through it that way, as well as the community. Is that fair? Is that fair with what you guys are thinking, or not?
I think it's fair, and I think it's fair that we're working towards this even as the next group comes to ask for approvals, right? And maybe it's another exception as we're working towards making something final. But I'm with you. I don't think I'm ready today to vote on anything. I wouldn't know what it would be.
So that would
I would
mean,
also say that if and when that time comes, based on whatever additional information we get, it's kind of a line-by-line item to look at some of these things and see yay or nay on how it might impact what we're doing.
I would agree. I think it'd be easier to look at one section of this table and talk through it and decide, do we like that or not, and then move on to the next one and.
Yeah, included or not, right?
I always mull the fact that some of my favorite people operate M&M over here, and we gave them a variance because really a restaurant should never have been gone there, because they have absolutely no parking. And when they're in operation, and they do a great job, and I'm very proud of them, you can't get into the post office. You can't get into the EMS. I mean, it's just parked. And there's no sidewalks there either. So everybody's out in the street and everything. So I think if we did that too many times, we'd have a real issue in our downtown area.
so I'm hearing a consensus unless somebody says, no, I want to put something on the books tonight. That I'm gonna recommend that staff bring and break this down, kind of like Brian just said, and do it in segments within this code. And we can make decisions based on each one of those. Is that acceptable to staff? I mean, is that an okay request or not really?
Well, I think it's okay, but I think that some of these sections point to other sections, so it may not always be possible to go linearly. I think that's what we tried to do this evening, but we can certainly give that a shot. I did, if you don't mind, I really want to point out and clarify something, and that is the parking standards for restaurants, bars, clubs, lodges, and places of entertainment are not changing. So I think many of the comments that were made about restaurants and everything, when we spoke to retail businesses and commercial, that's in a different category from restaurants and bars. So those are more your, like, a hardware store, shop, clothing retailer, and so forth. We're not proposing any changes to restaurant or bar or things like that, parking. Recognition of all the things that have been said here this evening, so.
Okay.
And I guess I have a couple responses to the various questions and comments. One, just kind of a broad reaction or follow-up to the notion that these edits are about making housing more affordable. There's a piece of this in here addressing the amount of parking required for multifamily housing, but more broadly, looking at all of these is about trying to find the right balance in the use of land for parking and trying not to overdo it, trying to not have the village come at it from a regulatory standpoint in a way that unnecessarily results in excess parking. And it's a real dance, and it's a challenge because even within a category like restaurant, you know how variable that can be. I mean, it's really hard to set up a category that's a right fit for someplace like Culver's, which has extraordinary turnover, for example, and has come back and asked for modifications to their site and how they operate and a whole bunch more parking. And so, your desire to continue to do what you've been doing, which is kind of, all right, we've got something to start with, but then we're going to kind of have to do this case by case. That's fair and appropriate. And I think the desire is to be a little closer to where the middle might be and recognize that it's going to move up or down from there, but not to have standards that are defaulting to excess. One of the things that the entire practice of zoning and regulating parking has been changing, that has changed over the years when zoning codes, older zoning codes, really based on the premise that you should be able to have off-street parking for almost every circumstance that use needs parking for. And so historically, retail parking was based on, well, what's Black Friday need? And it would be based on that. And thinking about, well, what's that most extreme use, be it retail, or be it, like, you know, the school use where you've got special events. I think there's been a shift, and we're certainly seeking, with some of these changes, to move to a recognition that big events result in on-street parking, for sure, and that's normal and good. That we shouldn't be setting up off-street parking to try to capture everything from a big event. Some stuff is just gonna have on-street parking, that's fine. Same with residential, that visitors, if visitors are generally using on-street parking instead of having off-street opportunities, if that is, and then the question is that working? Is it okay? So the conversation we need to have with recent projects that have been approved is, as you guys have asked, how's it working? What's the impact? Are we causing problems for anyone else because of this? When we're talking about a school, or we're talking about the downtown area, we should assume that a portion of the need, some of the time, is going to be met by on-street. And the question is not, is that appropriate? I'd say the question is, have we overdone it such that we're creating problems for people? Are we making it such that residents who live in the area with a single-family home that's a couple blocks away are so consistently having people park in front of their houses that no one can come visit them and park near their house? That's the kind of thing that we're trying to weigh and look for. To respond to a couple of the questions that came up, and talk about the multifamily requirement. Should we move from 2 spaces for every unit and modulate that based on the size of unit? Yes, you sometimes get cohabitation. You get a couple living in a studio apartment or a 1-bedroom apartment, but you also have just singles living in those. And so these standards are seeking to are recognizing that the average is somewhere around this. You don't have not every 2-bedroom apartment has 2 people, or if it has 2 people, has 2 cars. You have some people that share a vehicle. Yes, that's less here than it is in Middleton, because you don't have the bus service here. But it's fair to be asking, well, all right, how has this actually been playing out? Are we seeing any problems created as a result of the standard that, the reduced standard that's been applied recently in the past few years? Regarding the retail and the difference between, I just wanted to give you an example to try to spell it out a little more. We're saying instead of 1 per 200, and then evaluate it against the customer use of the building, which was hard to measure, especially because many times we're seeing plans that are spec space and we don't know what the customer space is going to be. We've used as a default, well, all right, 80% of that building is going to be customer use and 20% is going to be behind the scenes use. If you had a small space, like 1,000 square foot space, this change would be no change. Because you'd be rounding up to the same number of 4 spaces required for 1,000 feet. But say if it was 25,000 square feet of commercial space, the current standard would require 100 spots by that 80% rule, but the revised standard would require 84 spots. So a reduction of about 16% on a larger use. But again, this isn't saying thou shalt only land at this number of spots. It is reducing the minimum and then being open to a discussion. Last comment I would add regarding specifically the schools, I think we could have some conversations with the school. We might also just back off to something that's much more vague to say this requires conversation and we are going to evaluate the need at the time of application rather than try to come up with a standard now.
So you actually just hit where I was. So would we be considering with the school adding the middle school and making their construction and changing it? Would that kick into the new requirements? Because if we're gonna make a decision on that really impacts what they're doing, they should be involved in the decision. That's where I was going with that. And you brought it up, Tim, at the beginning, that there's, I don't know if you called it the trap door or what door, exit door or whatever, under exceptions. The exceptions thing is really the same as what we have now, in essence. we're changing the goalposts a little bit. Is that fair with what you guys, how you guys see this?
I think so. I think, to clarify too, part of the CNU memo, parking was one piece of how housing could be impacted. But yes, I think that's a good way of looking at it. You're moving the goalposts a bit. Again, as Jason was mentioning, I think we don't want to overpark the village, because then you have stormwater issues, urban heat island effect, and all the maintenance and costs associated with that. Because on the biggest, worst event, you might need all these stalls. Well, 99% of the year, you wouldn't. Is that what you want?
So I'll be devil's advocate to that statement then. You also don't wanna underpark ourselves either. Cause I look right now and say there's absolutely no doubt in my mind, there would be another restaurant in, next to Lone Girl if there was more parking. There is not enough parking for another restaurant to come in there. Another restaurateur who's looking at that as a space is saying, where's my customers gonna park? And then Lone Girl would be saying, yeah, where's our customers gonna park? There's just not enough parking there. So there's a potential for the opposite way is what I'm saying, of what you're saying.
I understand.
So,
I worry way more about underparking than overparking. I just, with runoff and the way we're situated with farms and everything else, we're not Houston, we're not gonna flood or anything like that. I think we're getting to that point where we're gonna sell ourselves short on parking, especially downtown, and I'm a little worried about Kilkenny as well.
And one thing that's been beneficial, I think, when we do make an exception, we talk to that business owner when they come and they present, well, here's what we've done, here's why we think you can make an exception for us based on our, experience. So we understand what the project's going to be. But I think, going back to Chris's point, that's probably a great example down there of, man, there is no parking for a restaurant to come back into that area. So there's, I almost like the idea that we have, if they want an exception, they come and they talk to us and they tell us why they think they get one, and, we look at it a case-by-case basis. If we were building 30 new businesses a year, I understand why this would be great, because it would let them come in, but we aren't doing that. We do a few exceptions a year. It's worked pretty well for us. So,
And Gary, across the street from Lone Girl, those businesses, the bars and et cetera, are lucky that Hofbrauhaus isn't in business, because they're parking all their customers there.
that's true.
yeah, for those who haven't been here a long time necessarily, your Gold Nugget Bar and those that were across the street used to park and had an agreement with the Coldest Lumber Company for people to
their
park
lot.
in their parking lot, cause it was after hours for them. So there was, that's how they did it. And as Phil is pointing out, that's not available
Not
anymore to them.
So it is a zoo.
Well, they've actually kind of infringed now into the parking also on the other side, which causes more cars to be over there. So, anyway, there's no doubt that that's probably something that we need to address differently, that maybe there needs to be some sort of municipal, and I'm not saying this is a for sure thing, I'm throwing this out there. Maybe there's some sort of municipal parking that happens downtown that we have to assist with our business community, so.
And one last thing on that, because almost everybody that came to us downtown for exception said, there's always parking over at St. John's. Now, there ain't nobody that's gonna walk that far. I mean, we're kinda spoiled. It's not gonna walk from St. John's over to Lone Girl.
I do want to follow up on the question, what is required downtown if a new use comes in, especially more housing? These standards apply downtown. There is language in the C1D district saying that, kind of pointing to section 16, saying that Plan Commission has the ability to allow exceptions if it's, infeasible to have parking, but, so there's some wiggle room there, but the standards apply downtown.
So I wonder, when we did our library, we did have an overflow parking spot, and I wonder how much that gets used. I have no idea.
That's a good question.
That property. So I'd be curious on that too, because that is relatively in the downtown area. Right on the backside of Lamp House.
Yeah, people use it or not.
So, and if a restaurant did go into Lamp House, I think it was Linda that said there was 11 spots or something open today. You know, if a restaurant did go in there, would that bleed into that parking lot that's already there? Because it is right kitty corner from it, so, I don't know. That's one that's probably planned appropriately for that, so. Okay,
We
so,
table this, Chris?
I think we're gonna table this based on our conversations. I'll get with Tim and we'll iron out how we wanna proceed. And Jason, sound good? You guys? Okay. Okay. Thanks, everybody. That was a good discussion. Next under new business, we have resolution renaming driveway at Rip Park to Rip Road for emergency services, Energy 911 updates.
Thank you. Hopefully this is seen more as an administrative change, but I'll quickly run through it. So currently, the drive through Rip Park, which is not technically a public street, even though the land is owned by the public, has two names, Fifth Street and Raymond, as shown on the screen. And we were contacted by Dane County Land Information asking for a cleanup based on the next-gen 911 standards for addressing, because they wanted some help with more specific locators of where, if an event happens, you go Fifth Street, which is east of, is that Dorn? Help me, Tracy. Is that Dorn? Yeah, east of Dorn. And then Raymond travels east of Dorn as well. However, at some point within the park, the name changes. So what we're proposing is within the park to rename that drive, that one-way drive, to Rip Park Road, and then the addressing would be sequential from north to south. And we've run this past Dane County Land Information. They're on board. We've run it past all of our emergency responders. They're fine with this. So that is essentially the request, to rename that drive.
So my only question, Bill, is if we name it Rip Park Road, does it change what we have to do with the road? Is it have to become a road standard
No,
if we make that change? No?
not to my understanding. It's in essence, part of the park like it always has been. It's just given a name like Tim had pointed out for emergency services.
Okay. Gary?
Make a motion to recommend the village board approve the name change to the drive within Rip Park to Rip Park Road.
Second.
Give a motion and a second, a quick second on that one. Any other comments from anyone else? Kevin?
I just have a question. What would have an address on that road? Like the tennis courts would have an address and
Parking lots.
On the screen, actually is what we're proposing. So each of those parking lots, so if someone said, hey, I've got a pulseless non-breather or a heart attack in Rip Park,
Gotcha, I see.
where's that, right? So now we have it at address at specific parking lot and shelter, parking lot, tennis courts, the water tower, and then the southerly parking lot. So it's very specifically to help response times.
Good job.
Do we gotta put an address up?
Good job.
Yes, we will be putting addresses on those places?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, any other questions? All good ones. All right, call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Next, in our Waunakee Westport Joint Plan Commission update, discussion, recommendation on possible land use designation for comprehensive plan amendment to enlarge the existing Waunakee Business Park.
So Joint Plan Commission will be continuing its discussion about a possible change in land use designation for lands on the north side of Highway 19 near County I. No decisions have been made, but discussion will continue.
All right, now I totally missed one of my, I had my question written down, Bill, so I still have to ask another question. Can I do that? Do we have to change our lighting at all because it's designated as a road
No,
in the park?
not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, sorry.
That has to be
I
a
did,
public hearing as a neighbor, not as a commissioner, by the way.
I didn't know if road.
Can't ask that
I didn't
question.
know if a road, I had it written down and I didn't ask my question, so,
To be honest with you, I believe the street lighting we have in there now conforms with the roads.
perfect, okay, thank you. Okay,
I have a question.
go ahead.
Do we have a quorum for tomorrow?
Are you backing out?
I am kinda, yes.
Then I might have a problem.
Time's the meeting, 6?
6.
Do you want me to back out too, and then it's just over? Or what?
No,
No, then I have to ask Chris if he can show up.
Oh my gosh, twice as long of a meeting.
You two can discuss afterwards.
all right, so do we need to say anything about this, or just move it?
Oh, for joint plan commission? No, it's just, that's just more,
Okay.
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. All right, good job, everybody. Perfect. I'll, expect you both.